Did you notice how the kids came to hear the sermon? Is that how you came into church today? Dashing in, so excited and joyful? There's an old story that man wakes up in the morning on Sunday and he says to his wife, "I'm just really tired. It's been a busy week. I don't think I'm going to church today." And she looks at him and says, "You have to, you're preaching." I don't know about you, but there have been Sundays where I didn't go to church with quite as much enthusiasm. Many days I'm here and I'm hurrying in because I so want to be here. Other times, well, our worship service is designed and intended to touch different parts of us, no matter how we approach the service, no matter what our attitude is. The first part of the service is the teachings are more intellectual. They can touch your heart, but it's focused more on your head. It's focused more on teaching. And then we move up to the table. I love the statement that sometimes used as the invitation to come to the table, which is, come to the table where you are known and loved. And that's exactly right. But that's more heart. That's more emotional. Yeah, there's some head, but let me tell you a little secret. No one really understands what happens there. Entire libraries have been written about communion. But ultimately, it's what we call the holy mystery. In fact, the best explanation of communion I ever heard was by a 4-year-old, like one of the ones we just had. He was asked by somebody who didn't think children should take communion, and he said, "Do you understand communion? What does it mean?" And this 4-year-old says, "It's a way to get closer to Jesus." Best explanation I've ever heard, by far. Now, if you remember a couple months ago, Pastor Jesse talked about the service, and he divided it into 2 parts, and this is actually the more common way of dividing the service, into the teaching part and then the Eucharistic, the communion part. And like I say, that's the way most people divide it, but if you've met me, I don't do things the way most people do them. And I like to divide it into 3 parts. We have the teaching, which ends at the end of the sermon. Then we respond. We respond to what we have heard. We begin by saying, "I believe." We begin with the creed, which says, yes, I've heard all these things. Now I want to proclaim, and I like that word much better than witness. We proclaim that we believe what we've just heard. And then we move on to the prayers of the people. And we proclaim to God, we've heard about God, and we proclaim to God that we believe you, we believe in you, and so now we have a conversation with that God we say we believe in. Now, most of the time when we have that conversation, be it here or at home, we actually do it poorly. And I say that because most of the time when we have that conversation, we're like the child who runs to the father and says, "I love you, Daddy. May I have some ice cream?" Which, if their mother isn't around, I'll give them anyway. But the point is that we tend to ask a whole lot and not thank very much less glorify. And the glorification, the saying, "Wow," to God is maybe the most important part of it. Now, after the prayers of the people, we move on to what I believe is the most important thing we do during the entire service, and that's the peace. Now, everything else, it basically is done for us. The teaching, the receiving of the communion. But the peace, when we say the peace, we're doing the one thing that could make this world better. We're seeking to reconcile ourselves with our enemies. Now, I know you're probably not going to see one of your enemies in the aisle. I know that. And it's perfectly good to wish the good friend who you have no problems with, to wish them the peace of God. That's wonderful. But if we can do that with our enemy, if we can bring peace in the world. So I invite you to do something. I invite you, while everybody's mingling in the aisle and that's fantastic, I invite you to slip away from that and come back to your pew, come back to your seat, and sit down and think about the person you dislike the most. Offer them the peace of God. It will not change them. It will change you. So I offer you that. Now, the transition to the communion. We've done the teaching, we've done the response. Now we move on to the communion. The peace is kind of the end of that. If you listen to the prayers of the people, we're asking God to bring us into community. We're showing specific ways, and in the peace we do that. And then we transition to communion. I like the symbolism that we can do in that today I'm not going to approach the altar. You may have noticed we've done everything up here. I'm not going to approach the altar until it's time for communion. And that's not because we're not welcome at the altar. Obviously, we're welcome at the altar anytime. Come in here in the middle of the week when it's dark and come up if you want. That's a wonderful experience. You're welcome there. But there's something symbolically about remembering there's that division in we prepare to approach the altar. We prepare ourselves. And when we do that, we actually approach it in a different way. We approach it, well, again, a little like the kids. Never notice the enthusiasm with which they come forward? I wish we all could go forward with that kind of enthusiasm, that kind of expectation, that kind of desire. That's where we want to be. As I said, communion, the blessing in the communion, it's more about our heart than it is about our head. It's more about our emotion. It's lifting ourselves up to God. And the last several weeks, as Pastor Jesse has been celebrating, that phrase has come back to me, has just jumped out at me. Lift up your hearts. You know the response. Lift up your hearts. And that's a fascinating comment. A fascinating, instruction. Because obviously, we're not talking in any kind of literal physical sense. We're not talking about lifting up part of our body. We're talking about lifting up and presenting to God, if you will, our attitude. In fact, I like the way that some people will actually translate that, and it's from what I understand, it's a fair translation, to lift up your imagination. Lift up your hopes. Lift up your dreams. Pick them up and present them to God. What a great way to go. And once we've done that, once we've lifted them up, it helps us because that helps us get out of the minutia of our lives. The minutia and frankly the evil, which frequently is around us and controlling us and making us just feel like we've got to be over there rather than over here type of thing. And so we're invited to lift ourselves up lift that part of ourselves up. We are called to talk to God about the future we hope is going to happen. But mostly, we are called to listen. To listen so we know where our part is in God's dreams. What is God's plan? What is God's dream? We heard it in the prelude. We just heard it in the Old Testament book of Micah, which is probably my favorite book in the Old Testament. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord desire of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. As I say, I like imagination and dreams. I like that better than the word plans. God's plans for you are so much greater than your plans for you. See, your plans, if I ask you for them, you will reduce and constrain your plans by what you think is possible. You will limit your plans to what you think is reality. God's plans are constrained only by the Holy Spirit, which means they're not constrained at all. So definitely, certainly talk to God about your dreams and your plans. Then be quiet. Stop talking. Stop telling God what to do, and listen for what God has in mind for you. What God's dream is for you. Now, lots of people are better than that than I am. I mean, I find it hard to slow down my mind. If you can, fantastic. I'm envious of you. But I can sit at the computer and begin journaling. And you know, it's a funny thing. These fingers type words I did not plan on them typing. I'm just thinking and thoughts come out on the paper that I didn't have before. Or sometimes when I'm exercising, back when I could run long distances, this was great, I begin talking to God. I begin having a conversation with God, and ultimately that's what prayer is. It's a conversation with God. And again, words would come out that I hadn't planned on. I learn about God's dream. See, my hope is in our Lord's dream for me, rather than my dream for me. So, pick up your bulletins and look on the back page. See, when you're retired, you can do this. I'm going to give you homework. If Pastor Jesse gave you homework, there'd probably be a council meeting about it. But I can do it. And on the back page, there's homework. And there's 3 statements with room for you to fill them in. And your homework is to fill in those blanks. And if you wish to email them to me for conversation, that's great. My email is there too. And do these in order. It's very important to do them in order. Ask yourself what you are hearing God say are God's dreams for this world. For this world. When you lift up your imagination, what is God seeing? And more importantly, what is God showing you? Now, then, ask yourself a similar question for this community, for our Father. See, I'm going to allow you to define world in the first question any way you want. You want to define it as very small, just your immediate world, or if you want to define it as a full sphere, that's fine. Whatever you want to do. But then imagine, try to ask, what is God's dream for this community? And you can do that any way you want, approach it any way you want. One way which might be helpful is imagine God's taking a video of this community in about 2 years. What's on the video? See, the world is impacted by this community. And the third one is yourself. What's God's dream for you? Now here I suggest you use a 1-year time frame because that gives you enough time to make changes as you think they need to be made, but it's close enough that you won't put them off. What's God's dream for the you that will exist a year from now? See, that you impacts this community, which impacts the world. That's why I say it's important to do these in order. Now, lots of self-improvement efforts use this approach. I don't care if it's weight loss or exercise or education. They say, look at the goal. Look at the goal, and then you're better able to move toward it. So imagine that you. And what I'm inviting you to do is write all this down and bring it next week. And when Pastor Jesse says, lift up your hearts, go ahead and lift this up that you've thought about. You can do it physically if you want, or you just do it in your own head. I'll warn them that he may have papers showing up. Use whatever technique works for you to hear God's dream. God's dream. Not your dream. God's dream. And today, come to the altar rail. Come to receive communion. Come up with that desire and enthusiasm, because that is the way we get closer to Jesus. That is the food which empowers us to accomplish so much.